Hello everyone, welcome back to World Citizen, where we give a global perspective on issues that are directly or indirectly affecting you at home. With the world experiencing political and economic changes that haven't been witnessed in 100 years or more, there is plenty of news to report on from various corners of the globe. But let me direct your attention to one region that has played an outsized role in geopolitics in our modern age and, for the time being at least, continues to do so. I'm talking about the northeastern United States, where two important speeches were delivered this week. On Monday, Foreign Minister of the Russian Federation Sergei Lavrov chaired a meeting of the UN Security Council and briefed the world on the state of the UN, its charter, and multilateralism. The first thing to note about Lavrov's speech is that it met the moment of crisis in which our world finds itself. Calling out the phony rules-based order concocted by the United States as a thinly veiled attempt to dispense with international law and create a new hegemonic global order that privileges the golden billion of the West over everyone else, Lavrov reiterated that, at present, the UN Charter and international law are the only basis for multilateralism, and for this reason, these institutions must be protected. At the same time, the Russian statesman made little effort to hide that the behavior of Western governments has stooped so low as to undermine the legitimacy or even the existence of these institutions. After going through the standard list of deceptions and crimes committed by Western powers in recent decades that world citizens will be familiar with, Lavrov placed Ukraine within this context and explained that the betrayal of the people of the Donbass region by Paris and Berlin after the Minsk Accords was the final, ignominious end of the legitimacy of European diplomacy. Finally, Lavrov proposed other multilateral organizations such as the BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Eurasian Economic Union, and the G20 as potential buttresses for this distressed UN system. It was not hard to infer from Mr. Lavrov's speech that the entire foundation upon which a shaky European and wider peace has rested for decades is in jeopardy, and that the adults in the room must act to preserve this hard-won foundation for posterity. Besides the content of the speech itself, world citizens will be interested to know that Mr. Lavrov was received like a rock star at the UN, surrounded by friends and dignitaries waiting in line to speak with him. Unfortunately, the childish behavior of the U.S. State Department, which initially had approved visas for Russian journalists to accompany Lavrov on his trip to New York, they then left the journalists stranded at the airport without actually issuing the visas, failing to fulfill their promise. It may have made it more difficult for Russian citizens to witness the admiration much of the world has for their top diplomat. Yet in the digital age in which we now live, it has no doubt been made clear to the people of Russia and those paying attention around the world that the Western game of diplomatic isolation has totally failed, and the political representatives of the global majority know who their friends are. By contrast, where is Lavrov's North American counterpart, Secretary of State Antony Blinken? Is he tucked away in the basement of the State Department, helping to plan Ukraine's vaunted offensive to end all offensives, which is supposed to take place this spring? Or is he just figuring out how to deal with the latest bombshell testimony by former CIA Director Mike Morell that it was Blinken who, as an advisor to then candidate for President Joe Biden, coordinated and spread the false rumor that Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation? Whatever he is doing, American citizens with an eye for global issues are no doubt starting to notice that it is easier to hear from Russian diplomats than from our own. We did get a speech from a high-level U.S. official involved in global issues, though. On Thursday, Biden's National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan went to the Brookings Institution in Washington to deliver remarks on, quote, renewing American economic leadership. Amazingly, Sullivan seems to expect everyone to suspend their disbelief and pretend like we are living in ordinary times, when it would make sense to talk about new global economic initiatives. He scarcely even mentioned the crisis in Ukraine, the bold predictions of victory he and his colleagues were making last year, the hundreds of thousands who have died waiting for promised military aid from Washington that never came and was never going to come, and the plunging credibility of the United States. Instead, Sullivan devoted his speech to his own obsession with China and announced the creation of a U.S. version of China's Belt and Road Initiative, which he called the Partnership for Global Infrastructure Investment. To give credit where it is due, Sullivan does seem to understand the high-level failures of U.S. economic policy of recent decades, perhaps at the level of an undergraduate economics student, which isn't saying much. But he did note that in the neoliberal era, quote, various reforms combined and came together to privilege some sectors of the economy, like finance, while other essential sectors, like semiconductors and infrastructure, atrophied. He was even willing to swallow a dose of humility when comparing China's economic miracle with the U.S. His exact quote on this is, "The People's Republic of China continued to subsidize at a massive scale both traditional industrial sectors, like steel, as well as key industries of the future, like clean energy, digital infrastructure, and advanced biotechnologies. America didn't just lose manufacturing. We eroded our competitiveness in critical technologies that would define the future." For American citizens, this is a fairly blunt assessment of U.S. failures in contrast to Chinese success. And yet, as Sullivan made clear that this new initiative was intended to directly compete with the Belt and Road Initiative, it is important to ask, did the U.S. actually break ground on any specific infrastructure projects? Or merely announce yet another round of bureaucratic initiatives to try and impress the global community? Unfortunately, it will not surprise keen observers of this administration that not a single new physical project was announced. Not one railroad, not one port, not one bridge. Compare that to the Chinese, who just announced that the latest addition to the BRI will be a $58 billion railroad from the Chinese hinterlands through most of Pakistan to an Arabian seaport. Sullivan, who is desperately trying to avoid the topic of the massive failures his administration is piling up, is once again revealed as no more than another clown at the circus. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you soon. This is Kynan Thistlethwaite with your World Citizen Update. See ya.